Office politics can be brutal, but corporate karma is worse. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. The overly enthusiastic compliments, the constant requests to collaborate, the way she'd hover around my desk asking innocent questions about my projects, but hindsight is always 20/20ths, and by the time I realized what was happening, Rebecca had already set her plan in motion. I'd been at Meridian Financial Solutions for 7 years, methodically climbing the corporate ladder through dedication and results. My quarterly numbers consistently ranked in the top percentile, and I built a reputation as someone who could solve the problems no one else wanted to touch. When Director of Operations was announced as an upcoming vacancy, I wasn't the only one who thought my name was practically already on the door. Rebecca transferred to our department about 18 months earlier. She was polished, articulate, and had an impressive resume touting experience at firms that made even our senior executives raise their eyebrows. She integrated herself into our team seamlessly, though I noticed she rarely contributed original ideas in meetings. Instead, she excelled at rephrasing others' concepts and presenting them with such conviction that people often forgot who originated them. "James, do you have a minute?" she asked one afternoon, leaning against my cubicle wall. "I'm working on this market analysis for the Anderson account, and honestly, I'm a bit stuck." "You're so good at this kind of thing." Flattered and always willing to help a colleague, I spent nearly 2 hours walking her through my approach to market analysis, even sharing the custom spreadsheet template I developed over the years. "This is incredibly helpful," she said, her eyes wide with what I mistook for admiration rather than calculation. "Would you mind if I based my presentation on this framework? I'll credit you." Of course, I agreed. That was my first mistake. The pattern continued for months. Rebecca would ask for guidance on various projects, I would provide assistance, and she would deliver polished presentations that incorporated my ideas but somehow never included acknowledgement of my contributions. Still, I didn't think much of it until the director position officially opened. "James, you're applying, right?" my colleague Marcus asked as we grabbed coffee. "It's basically yours already." I nodded, already mentally drafting the presentation I would give to the executive board. The final step of the interview process was a presentation on how we would expand Meridian's operations into emerging markets, exactly the kind of strategic thinking I excelled at. For 3 weeks, I worked tirelessly on my presentation. I analyzed market trends, identified key opportunities, and created a comprehensive 5-year plan that I knew would impress even our most conservative board members. The night before the presentations, I stayed late, meticulously reviewing every slide, every number, every prediction. As I was leaving, I spotted Rebecca still at her desk, furiously typing away. She gave me a tight smile when she saw me, working late. I asked, "Just finishing some touches on my presentation for tomorrow." She replied casually, "May the best candidate win." Her confidence surprised me. I knew she was applying too, but given her relatively short tenure at Meridian, I hadn't considered her serious competition. That was my second mistake. The next morning, I arrived early, ready to deliver what I believed was the presentation of my career. 5 candidates would present, with Rebecca scheduled immediately before me. As I sat in the waiting area outside the boardroom, I reviewed my notes one last time. When it was Rebecca's turn, I wished her luck. She didn't respond, just squared her shoulders and walked into the room with the confidence of someone who already knew the outcome. 20 minutes later, the door opened and Rebecca emerged, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. I stood, gathering my materials, but paused when I heard the murmurs of impressed conversation from the boardroom. Those projections for the Southeast Asian markets were remarkable, and her analysis of the regulatory hurdles in Brazil, I hadn't even considered those factors. My blood ran cold. Southeast Asia, Brazil. These were the exact markets and concerns I had focused on in my presentation. As I walked into the boardroom, a terrible suspicion began forming in my mind. My fears were confirmed the moment I connected my laptop to the projector. The executives looked confused, then bored, as I began covering ground they clearly felt they'd already seen. When I mentioned my unique approach to the Brazilian regulatory environment, the CFO actually checked his watch. "Thank you, James," our CEO said, cutting me off 5 minutes before my allotted time was up. "We appreciate your perspective." The following week, the announcement came. Rebecca was the new director of operations. The email cited her innovative thinking and forward-looking market analysis as key factors in the decision. I sat at my desk, staring at the announcement, feeling a mixture of shock, anger, and humiliation. How had she known the details of my presentation? And then I remembered, 3 days before the interviews, I'd had a doctor's appointment and left my laptop at my desk while I stepped out for 2 hours. It had been password protected, but I'd been working on the presentation that morning. It would have been open on my screen. She hadn't just stolen my ideas, she'd presented them first, making me look like the copycat. The next few weeks were some of the darkest of my career. I considered quitting, considered confronting her, considered going to HR, but without proof, it would be my word against hers, and she now outranked me. Instead, I did what I've always done when faced with a challenge. I got strategic. "Congratulations on the promotion," I said, stopping by her new office a few weeks later. "No hard feelings. In fact, I'd love to learn from you. Maybe we could grab lunch sometime." Rebecca looked momentarily surprised, then pleased. "Of course, James, I'd like that." Over the next few months, I initiated a careful friendship with Rebecca. I made sure to seem admiring but not sycophantic, interested but not suspicious. I volunteered for her projects, requested her as a mentor, and generally positioned myself as someone who had accepted defeat gracefully and was now eager to learn from the victor. All the while, I was watching, listening, and collecting information. The breakthrough came for months after her promotion. We were having drinks after work, something that had become a semi-regular occurrence, when Rebecca, slightly loosened by her second martini, began talking about her previous job at Goldman Sachs. "The pressure there was insane," she said, swirling her drink, "especially in the emerging markets division. My boss was this Harvard MBA who expected everyone to be just like him." I nodded sympathetically, but my mind was racing. Earlier that week, while helping her organize some files, I'd noticed her resume listed her Goldman experience as being in their commodities trading division, not emerging markets. A small discrepancy, perhaps, but it triggered my suspicions. That night, I began digging. I started with her LinkedIn profile, meticulously comparing it with her resume and the snippets of work history she'd shared over drinks. Small inconsistencies appeared, dates that didn't quite align, job titles that shifted slightly between tellings, projects she claimed to have led that didn't seem to match her purported roles. My investigation continued for weeks. I searched news archives for mentions of projects she claimed to have spearheaded, looked up conference attendee lists from events she said she'd spoken at, and even reached out to a college friend who now worked at Goldman to verify some details. What emerged was a pattern of careful, calculated fabrication. Rebecca hadn't worked at Goldman for 3 years as a vice president. She'd been there for 8 months as an analyst before leaving abruptly. She hadn't graduated from Wharton. She'd attended a 1-week executive education course there. She hadn't led the international expansion for her previous employer. She'd been part of a large team, and according to a former colleague I tracked down, not a particularly significant contributor. Her entire career was built on embellishments and outright lies, crafted with just enough truth to be believable and just enough vagueness to be difficult to verify. No wonder she needed to steal others' ideas. She didn't have the experience or knowledge to produce her own. For a moment, I considered taking my findings directly to HR or the executive team. But I knew Rebecca was charismatic and persuasive. Without irrefutable proof presented in the right context, she might be able to talk her way out of it. I needed the perfect moment, a scenario where her deception would be undeniable and the consequences immediate. That opportunity came 6 months into Rebecca's tenure as director. Meridian was pursuing Westbrook Industries, a potential client that would be our largest account by far. The entire company was focused on landing this deal, and Rebecca was leading the pitch. For weeks, she stressed the importance of this presentation, repeatedly emphasizing how her experience at Goldman and her international expansion expertise made her uniquely qualified to lead the effort. "This is the kind of client relationship I managed at Goldman," she told the team during a planning meeting. "Trust me, I know exactly what they're looking for." The final presentation would be delivered to Westbrook's entire executive team, along with our own C-suite. It was the perfect stage. I made sure to position myself as Rebecca's most enthusiastic supporter during the preparation phase, offering to help gather data, create slides, and even rehearse with her. She was so confident in her position and so focused on impressing the executives that she never questioned my motives. 2 days before the presentation, I sent an email to our CEO, copying the head of HR and our legal counsel. "I have discovered some concerning discrepancies regarding Rebecca's professional background that may pose a risk to the company, particularly in relation to the Westbrook pitch. I'd like to discuss this privately." Before the presentation, the meeting was scheduled for the following morning. I brought my evidence neatly organized, meticulously verified, and damning in its totality. I walked them through her fabricated work history, highlighting the specific claims she had made about experiences relevant to the Westbrook pitch. I'm concerned that if Westbrook were to discover these misrepresentations during their due diligence, it could damage not just this deal but our company's reputation, I explained. "I felt obligated to bring this to your attention before we proceed." The executives were shocked but also skeptical. They had, after all, hired Rebecca based on these credentials. Admitting they'd been fooled would be embarrassing. "These are serious allegations, James," the CEO said carefully. "And while your evidence is compelling, we need to be absolutely certain before taking any action." I had anticipated this reaction. "I understand completely," I replied. "In fact, I have a proposal. Let the presentation proceed as planned. I've prepared some specific questions that could be asked during the Q&A, questions that would allow Rebecca to either confirm or deny her claimed experience without realizing the purpose of the inquiry. If her answers align with her resume, I'll drop this matter entirely and accept that I've misinterpreted the evidence." After some discussion, they agreed to my suggestion, with our legal counsel adding several questions of her own to the list. The day of the presentation arrived. The Westbrook team filed into our largest conference room, followed by our own executives. Rebecca looked confident in a new suit, her presentation ready, her smile bright. She had no idea what was coming. The main presentation went smoothly. Rebecca was, as always, articulate and persuasive. She spoke confidently about market trends, citing her direct experience with similar expansions. The Westbrook team seemed impressed. Then came the Q&A. Our CEO started with a seemingly innocent question. "Rebecca, you mentioned your experience leading the Asian market entry at your previous firm. Could you expand on the regulatory challenges you encountered specifically in Singapore and how they compared to what Westbrook might face?" Rebecca didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. When I was leading the Singapore expansion, we faced significant hurdles with their MOS regulations, particularly regarding capital requirements. I personally negotiated with regulatory officials to establish a compliance framework that satisfied their concerns while maintaining our operational flexibility." I watched our legal counsel make a note. Singapore's monetary authority regulations would indeed be a concern for a financial firm like Goldman, but Rebecca had claimed to work in their commodities division, which would have dealt with completely different regulatory bodies. The questions continued, each one designed to allow Rebecca to either tell the truth about her limited experience or to dig herself deeper into her fabrications. She chose the latter every time, embellishing her stories with specific details that anyone with actual experience would know were incorrect. The final blow came from the Westbrook CFO, who had been quietly listening until now. "Your Goldman Sachs experience sounds impressive," he said. "I started my career there too, in the emerging markets division about the time you were there." Under Martin Reeves, right? Rebecca's smile froze. Martin Reeves had indeed headed the emerging markets division during the period she claimed to work there, a fact I had included in my briefing to our executives. "Yes," she said after a barely perceptible pause. "Martin was a fantastic mentor." The Westbrook CFO nodded, his expression unreadable. "Interesting. Because Martin didn't join Goldman until 2018, 2 years after you claimed to have left the firm." The room went silent. Rebecca's face paled. Our CEO cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a short break." During that break, Rebecca was escorted to a separate conference room where our CEO, HR director, and legal counsel confronted her with the evidence I had compiled. I wasn't present for that conversation, but I don't need to imagine how it went. By the time the break was over, Rebecca was being escorted from the building, her company laptop and badge already surrendered. Our CEO returned to the meeting and addressed the situation directly, apologizing to the Westbrook team for the misrepresentation and asking for their understanding. To my surprise, the Westbrook CEO seemed impressed by our company's swift handling of the situation. "Integrity matters to us," he said. "The way you've handled this speaks volumes about your corporate values." We ended up winning the Westbrook account, not despite Rebecca's dramatic exit, but partly because of how the company handled it. As for me, I was asked to step in and complete the presentation that day. 3 weeks later, I was officially named the new director of operations. The story of Rebecca's deception spread quickly throughout our industry. With her fabricated credentials exposed, she found it impossible to secure another position at a similar level. The last I heard, she was working as an administrative assistant at one of our smaller competitors. I ran into her about 2 years later at an industry conference. I was there as a speaker. She was staffing her company's booth. Our eyes met across the hall, and for a moment I thought she might approach me. Instead, she quickly looked away and busied herself arranging brochures. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only a sense that balance had been restored. She had tried to build a career by stepping on others and cutting corners. In the end, that foundation proved too weak to support the success she craved. Success isn't just about climbing the ladder. It's about who you step on along the way. And in Rebecca's case, she stepped on the wrong person at the wrong time. Office politics can be brutal, but corporate karma is worse.